I'm Don Harris of Think Red Ink Ministries. Welcome to the Feast of Tabernacles in Pytown, New Mexico. The theme for this year is 2 or 3 witnesses. Would you like to have 2 or 3 witnesses? Do you know someone who's looking for evidence of God? Not just evidence, but immutable evidence that someone other than the descendants of Adam or the latest evolutionary beings, whatever they are, have involved themselves into our history. Last night, we discovered the largest building in the world, and this was the Great Pyramid of Giza. Tonight, we're going to continue exploring biblical and current evidences of the intervention of God on our planet and in our lives. This was a plan of salvation. It was initiated in the Garden of Eden from the time that Adam changed his allegiance to Satan, which continues to this day. Adjustments had to be made because of the wickedness of man. Amazingly, the sovereignty and power of our God is limited by us. The things that he refuses to cross over are many. One of them is our will. We must participate with God, as did Abraham, Moses, and Jesus, so that our God's will can be accomplished in the earth, even in our day. The Feast of Tabernacles 6019 nightly messages will be available live and for a limited time on the Think Red Ink Ministries YouTube channel. If you would please subscribe, share, like, whatever the nomenclature is, all these messages to help spread this message around the world. Last night we talked about the Great Pyramid, and I wanted to offer and forgot to do so. Well, it's not actually an offering of this particular book. It's actually me just telling you about it. We don't have the book in stock, but it's easily available. And in last night's presentation, the Amazon link to find this book is available to you. It's called The Great Pyramid Decoded, and it's by a man named E. Raymond Capt. That's C-A-P-T. Probably one of the best. And as you can see, when you start looking into pyramidology, for Pete's sake, you're going to start noticing that, wow, it's a huge subject. And there are just a whole lot of books on the subject, and you're going to find that this one called The Great Pyramid Decoded is simple and concise and very interesting to read. I wanted to mention that to you. All right, tonight we're going to be talking about, you got your walking stick? Good. We're going to continue on our little trek. We're actually going to move from here at the pyramid, where we left you last night. We're going to walk toward Sinai. That's exactly what the children of Israel did, and that's what we're going to do tonight. Now, have you brought a bathing suit, or have you faith in our Lord God to part the Red Sea? You do believe that happened, don't you? Would you like to have some evidence to that effect? All right, I'm going to do this for you. We're going to now move into our presentation with you at the RLA Academy. Come with me. Okay. The wonderful thing about what I get to do is that I don't really have to manufacture evidences. I'm really not willing to do so. But as we talk about these things, it'll probably occur to you, and you'll be a bit surprised, hopefully, that there's a lot of things that we've just never been told that have been in evidence for many years. Not for a lot of these things have come about in our lifetime, and because Well, we have ways of doing things now that we just didn't have in those days. In all the millennia since these things actually happened. But in our last days, our God has been very, very good to us. He's actually given us evidences about His intervention in our lives. And these things were not available to people before us. One of the things that makes us very fortunate in the end days in which we live, I know you have a tendency, we all do, have a tendency to look back on the days of old and the way things used to be, and boy, back then they used to, and these kinds of things that, and justifications of our situation, and things are worse now than they've ever been. But, there's a verse in the Bible that says that it is a man without understanding that says, oh, if it were the former days, for those days are better than these. Look, these are our days. Those were their days. And we should really love the time we live in. Well, with the evidences that He has given us and made available to us, we actually do have an advantage in many cases, an advantage of evidences. Now, over the years, people have tried to dispel these evidences. There are some people that you're going to find, even as a modern-day Christian and with all your modern-day Christian friends, you're going to find that many of the things that you're going to talk about that you've heard about in this seminar in different places in different ways, you're going to find that you're going to be resisted as well. It's amazing how many people will relegate the stories of the past, of Joseph leaving his homeland and moving down into the area of the Midianites, and then finally into Egypt, and then his father and his family and his brothers and such followed him down there, and they lived in the land of Goshen. These are all Sunday school stories. But boy, when you start talking about archaeological evidence to prove that those things were so, I don't know what happens to people, but for some reason, they don't want evidence. They want to continue to believe it, or I don't know. I really can't figure out why evidence is so distasteful to many people. But there are evidences, and to not use them, especially with your unbelieving friends, I think that you're not doing due diligence. Why were all these things? Why did they come? Why have they happened? Why have they come in our day? One of the most fortunate things about being a Christian today is the Scriptures. There's millennia of people who worshiped God, who never saw a scrap of Scripture. There are many Christians all the way back to the first century that never even had the ability to read, much less to own Scriptures that were brought out of, discovered in, and translated from antiquity. And we have that today, and I think that it's, well, I mean, we tend to default. One side will take it and say that it's all fairy tales, and the others take it and try to believe it literally, and all the problems involved in that kind of thing. It's only because they can't distinguish the Bible from the Word of God. If they're listeners to Think Reading Ministries, they get that message quite often. It is the message of this ministry that Jesus Christ is indeed the Word of God. And so as the gift of the Scriptures in our latter day, so also are many of these evidences that we've been talking about. The Great Pyramid of Giza still stands as a total mystery to everyone who takes a look at it. Anyone who takes a look at it has an attitude about it that is somehow distorted, and the scientists don't want to believe the science that was involved in its construction. Mathematicians don't want to believe that that pi was way before they discovered it. And in the spiritual realm, people who spend time and money and much of their life trying to look for prophecies, everything from biblical prophecies to, spaceships. They consider themselves to be spiritual people, but in reality, they are people who, as the people at Mars Hill, were always wanting to hear or to teach a new thing. Well, you want something to teach? You don't have to resort to some of the stupidity on the internet to teach. What you can do is take a look at evidences, like the Great Pyramid. Have you got that figured out yet? When you get that all figured out, perhaps you can move on to Planet X. But until then, I would suggest that you make that a part of your study. Tonight we're going to talk about crossing the Red Sea. And there are evidences there that have been missed for many, many years. And unfortunately, it's not really a part of a thinking Christian's repertoire in their head that there are evidences that this actually happened. And why are they there? Well, if we take a look at our scripture that we start with, the secret things belong to Yah. The secret things belong unto the Lord our God. But those things which are revealed, and that's exactly what we're dealing with. Those things that are revealed belong to us and to our children forever, that we may do all the words of his law. And you will find this throughout. The Lord does demand faith. There are things that he will not prove. There are things that he will not show us. These secret things belong to him. And if they belong to him, then our rights to them evaporate. But when he reveals these things, they belong to us. And these are the kinds of evidences, concrete, inexplicable, nonetheless, ours, and are to be used, I think, used in evangelizing the world. All right, taking a look here. We're going to talk about the Exodus from Egypt. The children of Abraham and Isaac and Jacob were living in the land of Israel, and Joseph calls his family to go to the area of Egypt known as, we understood it to be Goshen. This is that fertile plain that stretches out at the end of the Nile River. And when they were there, as they multiplied and grew, they became a threat to Egypt. You know the story. And they were to be brought out of Egypt. At this particular time, Moses, inside this particular time, Moses was on the other side of the river in a land called Midian, and where he spent 40 years of his life. You ever think that that you've spent a lot of time in your life and not really have anything to show for it? I often think about Moses. 40 years? Wow. 40 years of essentially nothing? Not to say that, family life isn't a wonderful thing, but when we see what Moses was going to accomplish in the last part of his life, we see that this is going to be quite a new thing for him. Now, we have in this we have an Exodus from Egypt story that has really been dealt with by people who essentially are of no spirit, and they have an intellectual frame inside of which they work, and they really can't put there was a thing ever since, well, not ever since, but certainly before Thomas Jefferson, but you ever heard of the Jefferson Bible? He wanted to worship God in a logical and educated way, to the point that he saw it necessary to take his little X-Acto knife and actually cut and paste portions of the scriptures. Some of it was left out completely, and mostly anything had to do with a miracle was left out, because he felt like that the ministry of Jesus could be told without such foolishness as miracles. Well, sorry, Tom, it can't. It is part and parcel of what he and of who he was when he was on the earth. Nevertheless, they have made the trek from Egypt, out of Egypt, and made the Sinai crossing at the north of the Gulf of Aqaba, what was known as the Red Sea there. And then, if you'll notice that this little red line that is showing their trek down, this little area right here is at the point of Mount Sinai, is where Constantine's mother decided that this was Sinai. And it has been a huge disappointment to everyone who's gone there that knew anything about scriptures, by the way. If they didn't know the scriptures, they were there and they were in awe. And I'm sure they climbed up on that mountain and they threw their little hands up and they got goosebumps and they said, "Oh, God is there." But truth is that, I mean, even the Sinai Peninsula was named after a mountain that didn't exist. The Sinai, Paul says, was in Arabia, in the land of Madian. Well, that's not where we are. If you look, you'll see that just to the east of here, across the Gulf of Aqaba, is the land of Madian, or we call it Midian now. And so this is why when you do find what the books and even many of your Bible maps say is the Mount Sinai, it's got a question mark there, because I guess the scholars couldn't agree on this to the point that they said, okay, I'll go along with it if there's a question mark. So that's what they did. They tried to determine excuse me. They tried to determine that Moses left Ramesses, as you can see this red line, and they have him crossing this small area of water, which was thick with reeds. I have pictures of that, I think, in this presentation. I might have edited them out, but there were all different crossing sites that had been named over a period of time. Many people thought that this Reed Sea was actually the Red Sea, and when they walked over the sea, they were stepping on these reeds inside of 2 feet of water. And it wasn't really a huge miracle at that point. They were just mashing down these reeds and walking across a very small body of water. And they say, thus, no miracle. Well, what about the miracle of drowning Pharaoh and all of his army, all of his horses and chariots in 2 feet of water? You know, you're not going to get around the fact that there was a miracle here. You might get to pick the miracle that you want, but goodness sakes, we need to use our brains a little bit. If I was able to gather some satellite images and lay them into this picture so that you could see this area, and I laid them over a Bible map because they're so much clearer. You can actually see some things. And there's one thing that stands out in the Gulf of Aqaba. If you take a look, you'll see that there is a tiny little white spot right there. It's actually a larger landmass than you can imagine. This is called Nuweiba Beach. You remember when the Bible said that Moses and all the children of Israel all gathered there, and the Egyptian forces were kept back by a column of fire? You ever wonder how in the world that happened? Wouldn't you think it'd be more of a fence of fire? You know, I mean, how do you keep back all of Pharaoh's armies away from a huge group of people like this, how do you keep them back with a single column of fire? And so you can say, oh, okay, it's mistranslated, it's misunderstood, it's whatever. But the truth is when you investigate Nueva Beach, you find out there is plenty of room for all the children of Israel to stand on that beach and actually be protected. And I'll show you why. So the question comes, can we actually plan, can we plot, can we track an original escape from Egypt that has all the characteristics of the Red Sea crossing? And what evidence still exists, you'll be remarkably surprised. And I asked the question, what's with all the question marks? The Bible maps are covered with question marks because there's just a lot of stuff that, well, essentially they did not know. Let's take a look at some of the scriptures that talk about this particular trek out of Egypt. And God led them not through the way of the land of the Philistines, although that was nearer, or it would have been closer had they done that. But God led the people about through the way of the wilderness of the Red Sea, and they took a journey from Succoth and encamped in Etham in the edge of the wilderness. Well, this red line here would have shown you, would show you, had that been the trek that they had made, it would have been much closer had they just simply taken the direct route to Israel. It would have been all on foot, all on the land, except the Lord says, I don't want them to go through the land of the Philistines because I don't want them discouraged. I've often thought about that and thought, let's see, you don't want them to be discouraged. So what are you going to do? You're going to park them on a beach and let them stare at the ocean? and that's not going to discourage them? Well, I think that more properly this scripture could have been written, I have intention on really encouraging these people. And so here's what I'm going to do. Well, what did he do? Well, they left Ramesses and they trekked through from Succoth to Etham. Now, it looks to me like they were on their way, not to Israel, but they were on their way where? Do you remember? Well, it was the prophecy of the Lord, was it not? In the burning bush, he said, you will bring my people here. You'll bring them here to worship me. Well, this is wilderness. Well, you're going to bring them here to worship me. So he was actually on his way back to Midian. And by this trek, or by the location of these places, we see that this was the direction he was going. Exodus 14:2 says, Speak unto the children of Israel that they turn and encamp before Pihahiroth, between Migdol and the sea, over against Baal-zephon. Before it ye shall encamp by the sea. Now I've added these name placards in the areas that he's talking about. Baal-zephon being over in Saudi Arabia. Pihahiroth is actually, the word means the mouth of the gorges, and Migdol, of course, is further west. But he says, I want them to turn at Etham. So that's exactly what they did. They actually turned south and went to Etham, and they followed a wadi, which was a trench cut out in the land from rainfall. And the reason that the wadi, I have some pictures of this that you'll be able to see. This wadi actually narrowed the children of Israel into a place where there was no escape, right or left, and they certainly couldn't go back. The Egyptians were on their way. Why were the Egyptians on their way? Well, I don't know that it was a big secret to Pharaoh where Moses was going. He says that they may hold a feast to me in the wilderness. You remember this? Well, it may have very well been a part of more conversation than was written, that he explained to Pharaoh, I'm going to take them back where I came from, back to Madian, or Midian as we call it. Well, some of the scouts for the Pharaoh's army told him what had happened. Now, here we have him say, the Lord says, for Pharaoh will say of the children of Israel, they are entangled in the land, the wilderness hath shut them in, and the Lord says, I will harden Pharaoh's heart, that he shall follow after them. Now, there's some theology involved in this that we don't necessarily want to get into tonight, but we have the Lord actually provoking Egypt to continue after the children of Israel. And the news of the children of Israel having got into the Wadi Watir, when they got into that Wadi and they started following this trail, this winding trail that was cut by water so many years before, that area of the Sinai Peninsula was known, perhaps maybe not personally by Pharaoh, but certainly by his scouts in his armies and his, all the people that do reconnaissance for his armies. They all knew this area, and he says he's taken those people through Wadi Watir. And so Pharaoh says, perfect. That's perfect. There is no exit to that wadi except the Red Sea, or what we now know as the Gulf of Aqaba. So he shut them. They're shut in. All we got to do is go right down that same wadi, and everything's going to be just copacetic. We got it made. I imagine that many of their drivers and chariot drivers and horsemen and such kind of pulled on the reins a little bit and says, we got this. There's no need to run. There's no need to go nuts here. This guy has just walked into a natural trap. And so they set out for them. Well, where they were going, where this wadi actually emptied out into the sea, was right there on that spot I was just showing you on Nueva Beach. That white area right there. That is the exit of that ancient river that cut that wadi so many years before then. Now, it's interesting, this Pihahiroth is named the mouth of the gorges, because at this particular location, here's a satellite photo that I got for you, showing you Saudi Arabia on the other side of this beach, and there was a characteristic of Pihahiroth, because it was the mouth of gorges. Well, actually, when the children of Israel came out onto that beach, this is when they started to cry out to the Lord, because there was no place to go but back into Egypt, and was going to face their death with these Egyptian soldiers. But because it was a mouth of gorges, I don't want to give everything away. Let's continue. Let me show you what I was able to do. I enhanced the area of Pihahiroth so you could see this particular beach here, and it being across from Saudi Arabia. But I was wanting to do some other things, because I had heard some things about an area underneath the water there, and I thought, well, surely that'll show up with thermal photography on satellite. And sure enough, it does. So I picked this up and was able to see that there are different depths involved there. And as we continue to enhance this, and mostly on my behalf of just kind of changing the color spectrum here so it can be seen. You can see that there is a huge shallow area coming off of this beach that goes straight over to Sodom, to Saudi Arabia. And if you look just to the north of this underwater land bridge, if you look just to the north of that, you'll see that there are very quick steps toward a center. That blue center is approximately 5,000 feet, a mile deep. And you'll find that there are waters a mile deep throughout the Gulf of Aqaba. But in this particular location, between Pihahiroth and Saudi Arabia, just essentially below the water surface, there is a land bridge that if the waters are removed, there's a great idea. If the waters are removed, it will give the children of Israel an ability to walk from one, essentially, continent to another. It's not a different continent, but from one landmass to another, right through the Red Sea. This is such a beautiful picture, I just had to put it in there. But this is very, very close to to the biblical description of the parting of the waters. I used to try to think, how did this happen? And the Bible says that a wind blew all that night, and then the waters parted. However, I was thinking, okay, if there's a land bridge there, the only thing the Lord would have to do would be to open a cavern on one end of the place for the water to drain. I mean, a cavern within the earth. And all that water would go into a cavity of the earth, and it would essentially leave this dry for a while, and they could walk right over. However, now we're stuck with that intelligence factor again. See, I figured it all out. But as you read the story, what really stands out is that in 3, perhaps 4 different places in the scriptures, it says clearly that the water was a wall to them on one side and on the left, right and left, or one side and the other. And so there was actually a wall of water. So the water was not simply drained off. It was parted. Oh, Don, get out of town. That can't happen. That's just a fairy story. Well, is it really? You want to explain to me? Oh, we need to continue. All right. So here we have a crossing site. Here's a picture of Mount Sinai. This is where they were going. Just below the water surface on both sides of this land bridge, there were found underwater coral-encrusted chariot wheels. By the way, I hope you're not doing anything tonight, because I have a treat for you. We're going to watch a video about this very thing, and you'll get to meet with and see some great video about the discovery of these chariot wheels and such. This is a chariot wheel, and if I can put within it the likely shape of an axle with wheels on it. And you have to understand that coral grows on these things and eventually consumes the item that it grows on, but it still tries to maintain this shape. How else would a coral take on the shape of essentially an umbrella unless there was some kind of a fixture for it to attach to over a period of time and continually grow over all this time? But should you saw into this coral at this particular point, a couple of 3 millennia later or more, you would find no wood, you would find no chariot wheel, you would not find those kinds of things in there, because, as I say, they're consumed by the coral and, of course, by the water, and they would just rot like anything else. This is a mass of coral that, upon physical and close inspection by a skin diver, they were able to see within this shape that this was likely a 6-spoke chariot wheel, and these kind of things are discovered there. And what is that? I think I'll let Muller talk about these things for you. And let me show you a video, may I? This is a video of the scuba diving and the pictures that took place, and you're going to see this a slip of it now, but you're going to see it as it continues in the video to come. So we'll run that video for you now. Actual videotape of the discovery of some of these round objects. You can see axles in the center of them and the hubs of those wheels. You will hear in the video to come that this place underground is described as a literal junkyard and of chariot parts. And so I would say leaving these images in your mind, and those who may wish to poo-poo the whole thing and kind of say, well, maybe it happened, maybe it didn't. You're left with a difficult task, and that is that the 8 miles across the Gulf of Aqaba is found these chariot parts from one end of that land bridge to another on both sides. And the most beautiful thing about this is that what is left in the underwater is, of course, chariot wheels, and we know that the scriptures make reference to that, and God took off their chariot wheels. I think that is just, I don't know, that's goosebumpy for me. Now, as I say, that video, you will see those bits and pieces again as we continue at the end of this presentation. I'm going to show you the video Exodus Revealed, which is wow. It's just you're just not going to be the same here. To be able to scientifically and experimentally, and tangibly find. I've held in my hand a horse's hoof that was brought up from this area, and to just think of that. There was at one time this horse's hoof had a horse's foot in it and a horse's leg attached to it, and it was carrying an Egyptian across the sea to destroy God's people. And this is all that's left. These things are just wonderful. I guess what I'm telling you is our Christianity can easily be beyond belief beyond belief in that there are evidences for it. The pillar that you see here is known as Solomon's Pillar. It's believed that there was one on both sides of the Gulf of Aqaba where this crossing took place. This site was known for many, many years as the place that they actually crossed. And the inscriptions on this, there's a lot of things about this that I cannot claim to understand. I'm not a linguist. I'm not an archaeologist, and so I have to, just defer to people who are. But this column, this pillar of Solomon, is actually a marker of that particular time. When you cross over into that land, you'll find, as I showed you, Mount Sinai, which is nearby there. And this is where they were going. There is also this rock that is up on top of Mount Horeb. It's been wondered for many years, Mount Horeb, Mount Sinai, are they the same mountain? Well, the Bible talks about the split rock at Horeb, and it talks about Mount Sinai as if they're two places. Well, look at that rock. Isn't that very much like the priest, the hand that the priest makes? That well, I know many people think that means live long and prosper, but that's the age of stupidity that we live in. Gene Roddenberry, being a Jew, I don't think he actually made it up. But here's a split rock that, upon investigation, you will find that it has etchings, water etchings, where a huge amount of water came not down from the top, but up from the bottom. But these kind of things we'll have to deal with at another time. This is Pihahiroth. This is the gorge that you're looking back into the wadi from the beach here. This is how the children of Israel were able to occupy this beach, and because these walls of this canyon, these walls continued right around to the water, very impassable, very, very steep. It was impossible for the armies of Egypt to cross these horribly jagged rocks and actually move in any direction. They were stopped there. This is how a single column of fire can hold back the entire Egyptian army and keep them away from the children of Israel. Right there. The fire of God sat in that gap right there until the children of Israel were safe. And it was only lifted when it was time to lift, to bring those Egyptian chariots across that land bridge. And as they just was reaching the shore there, the Lord let those waters go and scattered Pharaoh and all of his army all over the sea bottom. As you continued to Sinai, you'll see that there was an altar there known as the altar of the golden calf. All these things are videos that I want to present to you, and but time really makes it impossible. Here is Wadi Watir overlooking, and you can see the snaky look of that canyon, which was populated at one time by Egypt and all of its armies, and traversed by God's people who ended up on that beach out there. Boy, they were probably nose to nose out there, but there they stood, and there they waited. So, what is all this about? What is this story? What is the Lord doing for us? Well, it's really kind of simple. You need to know that in the last days, the scoffers are going to say, "Where's the promise of his coming? Since our fathers were asleep, all things continue, just like they always have been." But you see, the fact of the matter is that there are evidences. They are there for us to see. Because these things, they are willingly ignorant of these things. The heavens and the earth, which are now, are kept in store, and reserved unto the day of judgment. These things not only make God very real to us, but if God is very real to us, His judgment is very real to us. We have no reason whatsoever to doubt what God has said to us in His commandments, in His statutes and ordinances, in the giving of His Son, in the way of salvation, the way of redemption. We have no real reason to doubt any of this. As a matter of fact, these things that were held in store for us until the day of judgment, they are ours. And they are ours to make us into better people. They are ours so that this week we don't have to be as tottering and unbelieving and as just that cowering type of person that we were. This week we don't have to be that guy. This week we can be different as we learn more and find more and see that these evidences actually exist. Next week there's no telling what we're going to be. And we're going to learn more and more. And the more we learn, the more we understand that God is a good Father. And He takes really, really good care of us. And it looks to me like He's going to continue. All these things have been held under the water. We're going to show you other things. We were in the Pyramid of Giza. They were held under a blanket of stone for so many years. And here, under the water, we're going to find mountains of ash as we continue toward Jerusalem on our little trek. And we're just going to continue to find more and more evidence that these things are very, very real. All right, what I'd like you to do now is get yourself your favorite beverage and sit back and relax and enjoy for the next few minutes. It's rather long, but it's nothing like I don't know, you probably don't sit in front of the TV for 20, 30 minutes at a time or an hour at a time, do you? No. But you're just going to have to force yourself. What you're going to find is you're going to learn some really wonderful things about what you see here. And we're going to play that video for you now. Thanks for being a part of our celebration, Feast of Tabernacles 6019. And we'll continue here tomorrow night. And we'll see you then. Bye-bye. Hello, my friends, and welcome, welcome, welcome. Here it is, the Feast of Tabernacles. And if you are enjoying Tabernacles at home, we wanted to perhaps offer you something to take a look at, something to consider. This particular night of Tabernacles is different than all the rest, because this has a significance that has been pretty much erased over time, erased and replaced. We have tradition.
In a land synonymous with ancient mysteries and timeless wonder, where the treasures of antiquity reveal glimpses of a glorious past. It is here, at the crossroads of biblical history and an extraordinary civilization that one story still captivates the human imagination as perhaps no other ever told. It is the story and the mystery of the Exodus. The Exodus story has endured for more than 3,000 years, and the power of its message and imagery is undeniable. Yet, despite the religious and cultural significance of the Old Testament narrative, doubts about its authenticity have long existed. The skepticism of the archaeological community has triggered many questions about the biblical narrative. Did Israel's exodus from Egypt actually occur? If it did, then why has so little evidence been unearthed? Were the people and events described in the biblical account real, or nothing more than elaborate fiction? During the next hour, we will travel from the Nile Delta to the depths of the Red Sea to investigate these questions in the light of new evidence and discovery. On this journey, we will explore and test the biblical record. For if there's any historical truth to accounts of the Exodus, then some evidence of Moses and the children of Israel should still exist, even if it lies buried under water and sand. Join us now as we probe ancient mysteries to examine the Exodus story against the testimony of science, history, and archaeology.
Then Pharaoh spoke to Joseph, saying, "The land of Egypt is before you. Have your father and brothers dwell in the best of the land. Let them dwell in the land of Goshen."
Any attempt to weigh the historical validity of the Exodus must begin here, in the Nile Delta, the biblical land of Goshen. For according to the Scriptures, this is where Israel first settled in Egypt. Nearly 4,000 years ago, the Hebrew patriarch Joseph, then a prisoner in Egypt, is said to have interpreted Pharaoh's dream foretelling 7 years of abundant harvest, followed by 7 years of devastating famine. After delivering this prophecy, Joseph was commissioned to oversee the harvest and storage of grain throughout the land. And when famine struck, news of Egypt's abundance spread quickly to its neighbors.
There is, again, plenty of extra-biblical as well as biblical evidence of constant moving back and forth between Palestine and Egypt, particularly in times of famine.
When famine ravaged Canaan, fear of starvation led Joseph's father, his 11 brothers and their wives and children, to leave their homeland and make the 200-mile journey southwest into Goshen. And as Egypt prospered under Joseph's leadership, a grateful Pharaoh offered his family permanent sanctuary in the richest area of the empire. The biblical record dates these events at early in the 19th century BC. But have archaeologists ever confirmed that a significant Canaanite population once inhabited northeastern Egypt during this time? Over the past 4 decades, extensive investigation has established the presence of ancient Israel in the Nile Delta. In 1966, just outside the small town of Cantir, an Austrian research team headed by Dr. Manfred Bietek made the first of a remarkable series of discoveries. Ruins at an excavation site called Tel El Daba are remains of what is now believed to be the earliest Israelite settlement in Egypt. While excavating in these cornfields, Manfred Bietek's team made another intriguing find. In a plot of land, later identified as Area F, they uncovered the ruins of a village.
In this small village there in stratum D2, dating to the time of Joseph, all the remains are Asiatic in nature. The material culture there is Asiatic, nothing is Egyptian.
A map of the excavation site confirms its distinctly Israelite origins. Archaeologists immediately recognized that the design of this horseshoe-shaped dwelling was identical to structures built in Israel centuries later. It was a prototype of Hebrew architecture constructed near the time Joseph was believed to have lived in Egypt.
And Joseph died, but the children of Israel were fruitful and multiplied, and the land was filled with them. Then there arose a new king over Egypt, who did not know Joseph. And he said, "Look, the people of the children of Israel are more and mightier than we. Come, let us deal with them, lest they join our enemies and fight against us."
The scriptures tell us that following Joseph's death, Pharaoh drove the Israelite population into slavery. This practice was vividly illustrated in an 18th dynasty tomb painting depicting foreign slaves making bricks from mud and straw. An inscription on the mural echoes the slave master's dreaded warning. "The rod is in my hand. Be not idle." There is now little doubt that a significant Israelite population lived in Egypt for several hundred years after the time of Joseph. Yet if biblical accounts of the Exodus are historically viable, then there should also be evidence of Israel's arrival in Canaan, the Promised Land, sometime between the 14th and 12th centuries BC. Such evidence does exist. More than 3,200 years ago, the pharaoh Merneptah ventured out of Egypt on a military campaign through the land of Canaan. Later, in a poem proclaiming his victories, he boasted that Israel is laid waste. This inscription dates from about 1210 BC and establishes that the Israelites had arrived and settled in Canaan well before Merneptah's conquest at the end of the 13th century. Additionally, at Tel Amarna in Egypt, archaeologists have uncovered a series of letters on cuneiform tablets. Many were authored by Canaanite rulers early in the 14th century BC. These letters contain desperate pleas to the Egyptian pharaoh Akhenaten for military assistance to defend Canaan from nomadic invaders. One of them warns that if Pharaoh does not act, all Canaan will be lost. The invaders were identified by the name Apiru.
And this is kind of a generic term for stateless individuals, people who weren't connected with any particular urban center. And so the Israelites undoubtedly would have been referred to as either Apiru or Asiatics by the Egyptians.
I do think that the term Apiru is the origin of the term Hebrew.
If the name Apiru referred to the Hebrew people, then the Tel Armana inscriptions provide strong evidence for the presence of Israel in Canaan. They also suggest Israel may have entered the country earlier than scholars had previously thought, at the beginning of the 14th century BC. If archaeological evidence shows that Israel appeared in the Promised Land between 1400 and 1200 BC, and if it also documents a Hebrew population in the Nile Delta for centuries before these dates, then one conclusion follows. The Israelites must have migrated from Egypt into Canaan, and an exodus actually occurred.
When you have brought the people out of Egypt, you will worship God on this mountain.
If an exodus took place, then a new question arises. What path did the children of Israel follow in their flight from Egypt? Any attempt to test the biblical record must focus along the route that the Bible itself specifies. Scholars have proposed many theories, but each must account for one fact. According to the book of Exodus, after leaving Goshen, the Israelites first set out for the holy mountain, where they were to meet and worship God. Moses and his people traveled to a mountain known in the scriptures by two names, Horeb and Mount Sinai. Controversy has long surrounded its actual location. Of the many sites proposed for the mountain, the most well-known stands in the southern tip of the Sinai Peninsula. Each morning throughout the year, pilgrims from around the world climb to the 7,500-foot summit of what is generally considered to be Mount Sinai. Few who walk these well-worn steps realize exactly how this mountain was first identified as the place where the Israelites encountered God.
They read the biblical text with an allegorical approach. They see symbols and images of things everywhere. And then you looked around, the large mountains there, Jebel Musa and some other, and it looks a lot like what probably Mount Sinai might have looked like. So already, probably by 350, it seems that some of these monks developed a tradition of identifying Jebel Musa, Jebel Katrina, one of these other mountains in the Sinai Peninsula with the mountain on which Moses himself had actually ascended.
By early in the 4th century A.D., Christian pilgrimages to this mountain had become commonplace. And today, a chapel and a monastery stand at the base of this traditional site of Mount Sinai. Since 1956, archaeological teams have searched for evidence that Moses and the Israelites once camped here for nearly a year after their flight from Egypt.
When it was under Israeli control, they found nothing really which would suggest Israelite interest in that area. Out of over 8,000 inscriptions from the southern half of the Sinai Peninsula, only a handful are Hebrew or Aramaic, hardly any.
Does the lack of Hebrew tradition and archaeological evidence discredit the biblical record, as many skeptics have argued? Or does it indicate that Mount Sinai stands somewhere other than the Sinai Peninsula? On this second question, the Bible appears to speak quite clearly.
Now it came about in those days that Moses went out to his brethren and looked on their hard labors. And he saw an Egyptian beating a Hebrew. And when he saw there was no one around, he struck down the Egyptian and hid him in the sand. When Pharaoh heard of this matter, he tried to kill Moses. But Moses fled from the presence of Pharaoh and settled in the land of Midian.
The scriptures indicate that 40 years before the Exodus, Moses fled from Pharaoh by traveling east to Midian, an ancient territory located entirely in what is now Saudi Arabia. Moses' decision to hide in Midian may have been influenced by the presence of the Egyptian military in the Sinai Peninsula. It is doubtful that, as a fugitive, Moses would have lived or traveled anywhere in the South Sinai with an army committed to his capture close at hand. The prospects of sanctuary in Midian, however, were far greater. Separated by the Red Sea from the Egyptian army in the Sinai Peninsula, Moses married a Midianite woman, tended the flocks of his father-in-law Jethro, and lived in obscurity for 40 years, until the day he wandered to the base of Mount Sinai. There, God spoke through a burning bush and revealed his plan to free Israel from bondage. Given the biblical record, some believe that Mount Sinai must be in Midian. But is there any other evidence to support this theory? Several Jewish documents, some written 600 years before Christian traditions, locate the Mountain of God in Midianite territory. In 250 BC, a council of 70 scholars translated the Hebrew Bible into Greek for the first time. Their translation of the Exodus account presupposed that Mount Sinai stood in the Arabian Peninsula. 3 centuries later, the Jewish philosopher Philo placed the mountain east of the Sinai Peninsula and south of Palestine. At the same time, the Apostle Paul, who was educated under the Rabbi Gamaliel, also located Mount Sinai in Arabia. Perhaps the most specific description of Mount Sinai's location can be traced to the first-century historian Josephus, who wrote, "It was the highest of mountains, near the city of Madian." Shortly after this account, Madian was identified in the Arabian Peninsula by the Greek geographer Ptolemy. And 1900 years later, archaeologists excavated this city that, according to ancient records, had once stood near Mount Sinai. The ruins of Madian lie just outside the modern-day town of Al-Bad, near Saudi Arabia's northwest coast. If there is historical evidence to support the location of Mount Sinai in Arabia, is there any specific mountain in this region that fits the biblical description? 15 miles east of the Saudi Arabian town of Al-Bad, such a mountain may well stand. It is called Jebel Alaz.
I have been always interested in archaeological finds that could confirm the truth of the Bible. I felt then I want to come in here to Saudi Arabia and see it for myself. I want to be able to say, I have seen this place.
In 1996, Vivica Pontien entered Saudi Arabia on a work permit. Throughout her search, Pontien encountered a strong local tradition that Moses had once lived in Arabia.
It seems to be a tradition among the locals there that this mountain range is called Jebel Musa. They call it that, and many places have the name of Moses, like there are wells near there that they call Ajin Musa or Bir Musa, which means the well of Moses.
When Pontien finally reached Jebel Alaz, her attention was drawn to specific features of the mountain that resembled the biblical description. Most prominent was a jagged peak, more than 8,000 feet in elevation, and blackened as if scorched by fire. And at its base, an enormous pile of boulders, at least 15 feet high and 60 feet across. The flattened top of this structure had the appearance of being man-made, and etched into its rock faces were petroglyphs of bovine creatures, cattle and bulls. The distinctive horns in some of the inscriptions resemble those found on pictures of sacred Egyptian Apis bulls. Could these stones be the remains of an Israelite altar, once built at the base of a holy mountain? Conclusive investigation is not possible at this time, for Saudi law severely limits all foreign research. Satellite photos of the area have revealed another geographical feature that parallels the biblical account: a sprawling plain of more than 10,000 acres. Flat, surrounded by mountains, and adjacent to the dried bed of an ancient river, it could have provided an ideal place for the Israelite encampment 3,500 years ago. Just west of the mountain stands another possible link to the Exodus account: a towering rock 60 feet high. It is split from top to bottom, and evidence of water erosion is etched into its base. Many features of Jebel al-Lawz reflect the biblical account of Mount Sinai, and as the highest mountain in northwest Arabia, it matches ancient Jewish historical records. Yet whether or not future excavations confirm this site as the actual Mountain of God, a considerable body of documentary evidence indicates that Mount Sinai is located somewhere in northwestern Arabia. As a result, we have 2 points by which to plot the first stage of Israel's exodus. For Goshen provided a beginning, and Midian a destination and direction. And between them must lie a body of water.
As for you, lift up your staff and stretch out your hand over the sea and divide it, and go through the midst of the sea on dry land.
The Exodus account states while on their journey to Mount Sinai, the children of Israel encountered a seemingly insurmountable obstacle: the waters of the Red Sea. Most searches for their crossing point have centered on 5 sites that straddle the eastern border of Egypt, as defined in ancient times. 3 of these sites are inland saltwater lakes: Manzala to the north, Timsah, and the Great Bitter Lake. Another location, the dry bed that was once Lake Bala, has also been considered. The 5th possibility is on the northern end of the Gulf of Suez, at a beach whimsically named on tourist maps as Pharaoh's Bath. 3,500 years ago, each of these bodies of water would have been relatively shallow, ranging in depths from about 3 to 50 feet. However, no direct evidence has ever emerged at any of these traditional sites to confirm the Exodus narrative. Nor does their geography resemble biblical descriptions of the beach where Pharaoh's army confronted Moses and his people.
For Pharaoh will say of the sons of Israel, "They are wandering aimlessly in the land. The wilderness has shut them in."
As Israel approached the Red Sea, Pharaoh received news that they had wandered into a dense wilderness of mountains and canyons. The Bible states that immediately prior to crossing the Red Sea, the children of Israel were gathered on a beach somewhere outside the borders of Egypt. In fact, the specific phrase, "out of Egypt," is used in relation to their place of encampment several times in the book of Exodus, creating an obvious contradiction between the scriptures and familiar interpretations of the story.
Was it not you who dried up the sea, the waters of the great deep, who made a road in the depths of the sea.
Popular theories that claim the Israelites walked through a shallow lake or marsh of reeds also contradict descriptions in the biblical record. The Hebrew writers refer to the Exodus crossing point as a great deep, the mighty waters, and the depths of the sea.
And the Egyptians pursued and went after them into the midst of the sea. Then the waters returned and covered the chariots, the horsemen, and all the army of Pharaoh. Not even one of them remained.
No direct evidence of a crossing anywhere along the eastern border of ancient Egypt has ever been discovered. As a result, accounts of the Exodus are often dismissed as fiction or legend. However, this absence of evidence could again indicate that archaeologists have been looking in the wrong places. For if the biblical descriptions are accurate, then the Red Sea of Moses and the Israelites may be located somewhere other than the lakes and gulf that separate Egypt from the Sinai Peninsula.
Well, I'm a scientist, so I try to analyze things and I try to go to the bottom with different issues, and the goal for this trip is to look at the Bible text as a book of history, a book of historical events, and that they describe something that really has happened, and then from the text try to understand what really could have happened.
In the spring of 2000, Dr. Leonard Moeller took part in an expedition through Egypt and the Sinai Peninsula. Moeller is a medical research scientist at the Karolinska Institute in Stockholm, Sweden. He is also trained in the field of marine biology. His skills in analytical research, coupled with a deep interest in biblical archaeology, had drawn him to the Middle East on many occasions. Now, as a member of an international team organized by Discovery Media Productions, he had come to the Gulf of Aqaba to renew his search for evidence of the Israelites' Exodus journey. For several years, Moeller studied historical and documentary evidence suggesting Midian as the probable location of Mount Sinai. He realized that to reach the mountain of God, the Israelites would have first crossed a body of water located east of Egypt's ancient borders.
The land of Midian is always on the east coast of the Gulf of Aqaba, and the mountain was in the land of Midian. There Moses saw the burning bush, etc. So if the mountain is on the east coast of the Gulf of Aqaba, and if the land of Midian is there, and if all these events took place there, they have to cross some water to get there. And therefore the Gulf of Aqaba is of great interest.
As the right arm of the Red Sea, the Gulf of Aqaba separates the Sinai and Arabian peninsulas. According to the Hebrew text, this gulf where Solomon's ships were harbored was called Yam Suf.
Most likely we talk about the Red Sea as the Gulf of Aqaba. We know that it's called Yam Suf, which is the Red Sea. We know that King Solomon had his fleet in Yam Suf.
This Hebrew name, Yam Suf, also plays a prominent role in the Exodus account, for it is used to identify the waters crossed by Moses and his people. The geography of the Gulf of Aqaba also resembles biblical descriptions of the Yam Suf God once parted for Israel. Aqaba is extremely deep, plunging more than a mile in some spots. It is adjacent to a dense wilderness of rugged mountains. and it is located clearly outside the borders of Egypt, as recognized during the time of Moses. These similarities to the scriptures have led Leonard Moeller and others to theorize that the Gulf of Aqaba is the Red Sea of the Exodus story. And if they are correct, then two distinct possibilities for a crossing point exist. The first is located on the bottom of the Sinai Peninsula, at the Straits of Tiran. This channel, 5 miles across, is one of the most popular recreation areas on Earth, as spectacular reefs and marine life attract divers from throughout the world. But the topography of the seafloor here would have made an Israelite crossing highly unlikely. For less than a mile offshore, a subterranean canyon plunges nearly 1,000 feet at a grade so steep, passage on foot across jagged coral beds would have been virtually impossible, even if the waters were miraculously removed. "70 miles north of the straits, near the center of the Aqaba coast, another potential crossing site extends into the sea. It is called the Nuweiba Peninsula.
This is probably the only place at the Gulf of Aqaba, the western shore, where you could gather as many people as the Bible states that they were.
Satellite photographs of the Nuweiba Peninsula clearly reveal its distinctive geography. This triangular-shaped beach would be the focus of a remarkable search for evidence of the Israelites' journey.
When Pharaoh let the people go, God did not lead them on the road through the Philistine country. For he said, if they face war, they might change their minds and return to Egypt. So God led the people around by the desert road toward the Red Sea.
If the Israelites traveled from Goshen to the Aqaba coast, then the biblical description of their route to freedom is very specific. They walked a road through the Sinai Desert in the direction of the Red Sea. Only the southernmost road, a trade route that stretched from Egypt to the top of the Red Sea and then on to Midian, matched the biblical description. Located above the peninsula's rugged mountain ranges, this trade route was well suited for travel, as its flat, hard-packed terrain made long journeys on foot manageable and commonplace. When Moses fled from Pharaoh after killing an Egyptian slave master, he would have followed this route to sanctuary in ancient Midian. Then, 40 years later, he led his people out of Egypt over this same desert road again.
And the Lord was going before them in a pillar of cloud by day to lead them, and in a pillar of fire by night to give them light, that they might travel by day and night.
By walking through the desert during the cooler hours of the early morning and night, the Israelites could have crossed the Sinai in approximately 3 weeks, the time allowed by the biblical record. The scriptures imply they had a significant head start on the Egyptian army, for many days passed before Pharaoh decided to bring Israel back into captivity. Then, while his army prepared to give chase, he received a surprising report of Moses' path through the wilderness.
Now the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, Tell the sons of Israel to turn back and camp before Pi-hahiroth, between Migdol and the sea. For Pharaoh will say, They are wandering aimlessly in the land. The wilderness has shut them in.
This satellite photograph defines the Israelites' unexpected change of course. They had entered a winding maze of dry riverbeds that branched off the southern trade road in a twisting path to the coast. And within this canyon, called Wadi Watir, Moses and his people were hemmed in between walls of rock 2,000 feet high. After walking 18 miles through the wadi, the Israelites caught their first glimpse of the mouth of the canyon and an even greater obstacle that now stood before them. Upon exiting the Wadi Watir, Moses would have assembled his people at a place called Pi-hahiroth. Though its location remains controversial, the meaning of this Hebrew name may point to the site of the Israelites' encampment. For the word Pi-hahiroth translates mouth of the gorges, a perfect description of this beach formed by sand and rock washed through the canyon by seasonal rainfall. From here, according to the scriptures, Moses and his people could travel no farther.
Then the Egyptians chased after them with all the horses and chariots of Pharaoh, his horsemen and his army. And they overtook them camping by the sea, beside Pi-hahiroth. Now, when the Egyptians had overtaken the Hebrews, they also seized on the passages by which they imagined the Hebrews might fly, shutting them up between inaccessible precipices and the sea. For there was on each side a ridge of mountains that terminated at the sea, which were impassable by reason of their roughness and obstructed their flight.
When and if they ended up at this peninsula, then of course they would have been in a very desperate situation. And according to the Bible, Moses didn't know anything what to do. He was completely trapped. The people wanted to kill him, surrounded by mountains, the sea, and they couldn't go anywhere.
At Nueva Beach, the Israelites were surrounded by mountains to the north and south, an ocean to the east, and the Egyptian army to the west. Hopelessly trapped, it is not difficult to understand their anguished cry to Moses, "Why did you lead us out of Egypt to die?" In response, Moses again looked to God for deliverance.
Then Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and the Lord swept back the sea, and turned the sea into dry land, so the waters were divided.
In all of Scripture, there may be no more dramatic image. The biblical account of an ocean divided, Israel's passage to safety, and the destruction of Pharaoh's army defy naturalistic explanation. But if these events did occur, then physical evidence could still lie off the shore of the Nueva Peninsula. For more than 20 years, divers and explorers from 3 continents, each intrigued by clues linking the Gulf of Aqaba and the biblical Yam Suf, have come to Nueva Beach seeking possible evidence of an Israelite crossing. Their search focused on the 600 chariots the Bible says were destroyed in the Red Sea. Inscriptions thousands of years old, and the few chariots recovered from ancient tombs reveal much about the construction of these legendary vehicles of war. Could any of them actually be found on the seafloor off the Nueva Peninsula? Based on his analysis of documentary evidence, Leonard Muller had long suspected the Aqaba coast as the probable location of the Red Sea crossing. Like others who had explored Nueva before him, Muller immediately recognized the difficulty of this search. Though the coral complicates any search here, it may have been instrumental in preserving the shapes of ancient artifacts. For coral is a living organism that will not begin to grow on a foundation of sand or silt. Instead, it must first attach itself to a solid object, where it will sometimes conform to the shape of its host.
So for instance, if it would grow on a wooden artifact, the wood would normally disappear in the seawaters after a time. But if you have corals growing on the wooden artifact, the coral could have the shape of the wooden artifact. And then the corals would consume the wooden material over periods of time, but still keep the shape of the wooden artifacts.
During the course of his explorations, Muller observed that the pattern of coral growth at Nueva differed from other parts of the Gulf. Unlike the coral at the northern and southern ends of Aqaba, which often forms large, dense reefs, some covering many acres, the formations at Nueva Beach are generally smaller and scattered randomly across the sea floor.
When we dive and when we film at the Nueva location, we look for certain structures, and you try to look for 90-degree angles or circular objects, wheel-like structures. So that is what you scan for, so to speak, when you dive.
Since the earliest explorations at Nueva, one distinctive type of formation has often been identified on the sea floor. A slender, table-like structure, sometimes standing on end, with a coral-encrusted base, a straight shaft, and a circular top.
It's a 90-degree angle, a right angle, between something that looks like an axle and the wheel. And you can see this in different varieties, and it looks very different from normal coral growth. And it is like a man-made structure with a coral growth on it.
While most of the possible artifacts found off the coast of Nueva are covered with coral, one significant discovery was not.
It is a wooden basic structure of the wheel, and it's covered with gold, or electrum. It's a mixture of silver and gold. And corals have not been able to grow on it. It's been very well preserved. Although it's very fragile, it seems like the wooden content has been dissolved. So I mean, you could break it if you would try to remove it.
After its discovery, the fragile wheel-shaped veneer was photographed, then left in place on the sea floor. Later analysis revealed that its dimensions and design resembled four-spoke chariot wheels painted on an 18th dynasty tomb wall near the biblical date of the Exodus. After reviewing photographic evidence and making several dives of his own, Muller concluded that a more systematic investigation of the Nueva seafloor was warranted. And in the spring of 2000, the Discovery Media team lowered a robotic camera into these waters for the first time. Controlled from the ship, the camera was maneuvered across the seafloor, transmitting video images for study and evaluation.
We have been down to some 80-90 meters, so we can go deeper down that we can't do with ordinary diving.
The robotic camera's survey revealed many shapes and objects familiar to Muller, including coral formations with right angles, arches, discs, and straight shafts fused into larger masses that had the appearance of twisted wreckage.
Now, when we have been able to go back and forth with the remote control camera, we can repeatedly see that these strange structures we are looking for are there. Not at one place, but you see them again and again and again. And this could be the outer rim of a wheel going around like
The
that.
abundance of these unusual coral structures was even more apparent when tapes of the expedition were carefully scrutinized during the months following the search at Nueva.
Perhaps have a wheel here, standing on the seabed.
While the robotic camera logged hours of video documentation, Viveka Pontien and other divers on a second research vessel used metal detectors to evaluate specific structures on the sea floor. Pontien and her colleagues realized that the wheels of many Egyptian chariots were often reinforced with bronze. They hoped to find evidence of the metal encrusted in coral. A scan of this formation indicated a circular metallic pattern around its edge, perhaps evidence of the broken rim of a chariot wheel. Other coral formations examined also contained fragments of metal. Viveka Pontien's interest in this research was heightened by a discovery she had made 3 years earlier, 8 miles due east of the Nueva Peninsula. During her stay in Saudi Arabia, Pontien not only searched for Mount Sinai, she also made several dives in an attempt to document evidence of the Egyptian army on the Saudi side of the Gulf.
At one spot there is like a very shallow sort of land tongue going out in a straight angle towards Nueva. You could tell it by the shift of the color of the water. You could see how it was turquoise far out, you know. So I thought this would be interesting for exploration, so we did some dives near to that.
The scattered, irregular coral formations on the Saudi side of Aqaba resemble those previously found off the Nueva Peninsula. In the midst of them, Pontien photographed this circular object attached to what appears to have been a broken axle or hub. This discovery was significant for 2 reasons. Pontien had documented the coral-encrusted form of a wheel with dimensions similar to ancient Egyptian artifacts directly across from the proposed Nueva crossing site. Her find also provided independent confirmation of earlier evidence establishing wheel-like formations on both coasts of the Red Sea, in accordance with descriptions in the biblical record.
And the Lord looked down on the Egyptian army, and he made the wheels of their chariots come off.
While Egyptian environmental laws prohibit removal of any coral for scientific dating and analysis, photographic evidence may provide a link to the time of the Exodus. Scholars have recognized that the design of the chariot wheel can be used to identify specific periods in Egyptian history. In the waters of Aqaba, it appears that remnants of 4- and 6-spoke wheels have been discovered. These designs were used simultaneously only during Egypt's 18th dynasty and no later than about 1400 BC, a time frame that coincides closely to the biblical date of the Exodus. The discoveries made between Nueva Beach and Saudi Arabia have been fascinating, but they also raise some obvious questions. If God parted these waters, how could a large group of people, including the elderly and the very young, have walked across the Gulf of Aqaba? The imposing terrain of the Great Rift Valley is evident in the towering mountains that line the Aqaba coast. They drop straight down into the sea, creating an underwater canyon more than a mile deep, a seemingly impassable divide, even if devoid of water. while surveying the subsurface topography of the Nueva crossing site, evidence was uncovered that could help explain how Israel walked from one coast to the other. At its deepest points, the Gulf of Aqaba plunges more than 5,500 feet. Yet the ocean floor off the coast of Nueva Beach rises up several thousand feet from this trench, creating a wide, flattened ridge that the Israelites could have crossed once the Red Sea was divided. Simulated to scale in this computer animation, the view of the Gulf south of the Nueva Peninsula is striking. A chasm, deeper than the Grand Canyon, extends more than 50 miles. Its steep shorelines stand in sharp contrast to the shallow grade of the gently sloping ridge that extends from Nueva Beach to Saudi Arabia. The robotic camera was used to evaluate the physical characteristics of this undersea ridge for the first time.
It's just flat, extremely flat, and very wide. There are no corals, there are no pieces of rock, and we followed that far out in the Gulf of Aqaba. It got deeper and deeper, but it was very flat all the time. And the interesting thing is also that the material on the seabed is not mud, as it is in the Gulf of Suez or at other places. It's a thin layer of sand or silt. It is easy to walk on it if you take away the water, and there would be no limit to have an enormous amount of people there.
Thus says the Lord, who makes a way through the sea and a path through the mighty waters. Come and see the works of God. He turned the sea into dry land, and they passed through on foot.
While the existence of an underwater ridge stretching from Nueva Beach to Saudi Arabia may make it easier to understand how the Israelites could have crossed the Aqaba Gulf, it does not explain the actual parting of these waters in the manner described by the writers of the Exodus account.
Well, if you look at the Red Sea crossing as it's described in the Bible, what you clearly see there is this situation where a wind has come up and has dried out the land for them to cross. But then there's this element where the waters have formed a wall to the left and the right of the Israelites as they pass through. And they say that 2 or 3 times, so it's quite clear in their memory that the waters were like a wall. And there's just no naturalistic explanation for something like that.
For those who accept the idea that God could have divided the Red Sea by performing a miracle, the lack of naturalistic explanation poses no difficulty. Scholars, however, have generally assumed that miracles are impossible because they violate the laws of nature. As a result, any document based on a miraculous event must be historically unreliable. This reasoning, though widespread, is not without opposition. C.S. Lewis believed that miracles are acts of God, and therefore entirely possible if there is a God to take action.
If you assume that God doesn't exist, then miracles are impossible, of course. But if God does exist, then there's the possibility that miracles could have occurred. So when we're looking at the events in the Bible like this, we have to be objective when we come to the evidence. We have to look at the data and say, is it really clear enough that a miracle might have really occurred here? If we objectively look at the evidence then, and it really seems to lead in the direction of something miraculous, then we need to be open to that.
After more than a century of research, where does the body of available evidence for the Exodus now lead? Many archaeologists have attempted to trace the path of Israel's journey to Mount Sinai. The routes they have most frequently proposed have yielded little or nothing in the way of actual confirmation. Yet today, another theory for the Israelites' path, far different from traditional ideas, may provide a trail of direct evidence for both a miracle and the historical validity of the Exodus account. Beginning in northeastern Egypt, Egyptian records and archaeological excavations document the presence of a Hebrew slave population several centuries prior to the probable time of the Exodus. Evidence also shows that the Hebrews later appeared in Canaan, the Promised Land, after centuries of bondage. Historical documents and possibly archaeological evidence locate the Mountain of God in northwest Arabia, the site of biblical Midian. And a trade route leading to Midian, intersected by a system of riverbeds terminating at the Aqaba coast, matches biblical and historical descriptions of the Israelites' path to the Red Sea. There, in the waters off Nuweiba Beach, structures resembling 18th dynasty chariot wheels lie embedded in coral on an elevated ridge that connects the Sinai and Arabian peninsulas.
Well, a good scientific theory explains a lot of evidence very simply and coherently. And there's a pattern that's coming out of this evidence that really suggests that the biblical record has a lot more historical content to it than what scholars have been willing to grant in the past.
The scriptures tell us that nearly 3,500 years ago, God parted the waters of the Red Sea and led the Israelites to freedom. Did it happen here? Did it happen at all? Is the biblical description factually accurate? As with any historical investigation, we may never know with absolute certainty. And so, perhaps belief in the Exodus will always require a measure of faith. But facts and faith need not conflict, as recent discoveries suggest. For history and archaeology have now uncovered compelling reasons to reconsider the extraordinary claims of the Exodus story. The story of the Exodus has long been cloaked in mystery. Legendary filmmaker Cecil B. DeMille was so captivated by the Exodus, he created one of Hollywood's greatest epics, The 10 Commandments. DeMille personally appeared in the preview to describe his version of Moses leading the Israelites to freedom. In light of recent archaeological discoveries, some of DeMille's observations have been disproved. Generations have passed, but Cecil B. DeMille's 10 Commandments remains the crowning achievement of Hollywood's story of the Exodus.
This is a reproduction of one of Michelangelo's greatest works, Moses. If you will be patient with me, I'd like to talk to you about this wonderful soul that Michelangelo caught so magnificently in marble. For centuries, people have been puzzled by these horns. Well, in the original book of Exodus, the Hebrew text tells us that when Moses came down from the mount, Keren came from his head. Well, Keren is the Hebrew word for horn, but it also is the Hebrew word for rays of light. Later artists, like Doré, show Moses with rays of light coming from his head. Here is a photograph of the original statue in Rome. Now notice the likeness to Charlton Heston, who plays Moses in the 10 Commandments. We generally think of Moses either as the prophet with the long white beard, or as he is portrayed in this canvas painted by Van Dyck in England about 1640, a baby found in the bulrushes by the daughter of Pharaoh. Incidentally, this is the first time this Van Dyck has ever been exhibited. Yet, there is a whole lifetime between the baby in the basket and the bearded prophet receiving the tablets of the 10 Commandments on Mount Sinai. These very tablets were actually carved from the red granite of the holy mountain itself. This Canaanite lettering of the late Bronze Age is a forerunner of the Hebrew alphabet, the Greek alphabet, and our own alphabet today. The Bible omits the first 30 years or so that brought Moses to manhood. To fill in those missing years, we turn to ancient historians, Philo and Josephus. These historians had access to documents long since destroyed, or perhaps lost, like the Dead Sea Scrolls. To film the 10 Commandments, we rolled our cameras on the very ground that Moses walked. Here from the land of Goshen, across the Red Sea, down through the deserts of Shur and Sin, to Mount Sinai, the holy place of God. This haloed sun was above the mountain as our caravan descended. No, Moses' life is one of the greatest adventure stories ever put between the covers of a book. Here in the first chapter of Exodus, by the merciless edict of the Pharaoh, Ramesses I, all the newborn Hebrew male children were condemned to death. To save the baby Moses' life, Moses' mother, Jochebed, played by Martha Scott, placed him in a basket daubed with pitch and set him afloat on the great river Nile. The swift current, as though guided by divine power, sweeps him to the feet of Bithiah, Pharaoh's daughter, played by Nina Foch. The princess, having no son of her own, adopts the baby and raises him in the very court which had condemned him to death. Where can you find greater drama than that? Moses grew to manhood and power, a prince of Egypt, The old pharaoh had died, and his son Seti, played by Sir Cedric Hardwicke, had become pharaoh. Did Seti find out this prince of Egypt was a Hebrew slave? What did Moses do when he learned the truth about himself? That he, a rich and powerful prince, was less than the dust beneath the wheels of Pharaoh's chariot. And Seti's own son, the powerful, magnificent, fearless Prince Ramesses, played by Yul Brynner. Who was it that betrayed Moses to him? Was it the throne princess, Nefertiti, played by Anne Baxter? Or did the old nurse, Memnet, played by Judith Anderson, betray the secret of Moses' birth that she had kept for 30 years? Then there was the cynical, fastidious Baca, the master builder of Egypt, played by Vincent Price. Was he the informer? Or was Moses betrayed by Dathan, taskmaster over his own people, played by Edward G. Robinson?
Very well. I will bargain with you. If what you say pleases me, I will give you your price, all of it. If not, I will give you the point of this blade through your lying throat. Agreed?
Agreed. When Moses learned that he was Hebrew, and he looked upon the sufferings of his own people, the Bible tells us Moses killed. How did he escape from Egypt? And who gave him sanctuary from Pharaoh's sentence of death?
Goeth, strike your bows.
Which of Jethro's 7 daughters did he marry? From whom did he learn the ways of a shepherd? Was it from Jethro's eldest daughter, Zephyrah, played by Yvonne De Carlo? What made Moses return to Egypt and almost certain death when the young Ramesses became the new pharaoh? Why did God command Moses to bring the 10 plagues upon Pharaoh and the Egyptians?
If there is one more plague on Egypt, it is by your word that God will bring it. And there shall be so great a cry throughout the land that you will surely let the people go.
Come to me no more, Moses. For on the day you see my face again, you will surely die.
Did Nefertiti revenge the killing of her own son? How did the death of the firstborn free the slaves?
Go out from among us, you and your people. I set you free.
Who organized the greatest migration the world has ever seen? The Exodus. Was it Joshua, the young leader played by John Derrick, who became the powerful military commander of his people? The Bible tells us little of Joshua's youth, or his hopes and loves, or of those who may have loved him, like Lilia, played by Deborah Paget. How did God harden Pharaoh's heart that he called forth 600 of his war chariots to destroy Moses and the children of Israel? How did they escape with Pharaoh's chariots at their backs and the Red Sea before them?
Was it because there were no graves in Egypt that you took us away to die in the wilderness?
All this happened 3,000 years ago, but we're still fighting the same battle that Moses fought. Are men to be ruled by God's laws, or are they to be ruled by the whims of a dictator like Ramesses? Are men the property of the state, or are they free souls under God? The story of Moses, as told in the Bible, is a life of struggle and defiance, a life of love and battle and sacrifice and murder, a life of achievement and disaster, of humiliation and glory. Moses is one of the world's greatest human beings. And human he was to the point of sin, and holy to the point of seeing God, and receiving from him the law, by which men may live in peace and freedom, the 10 Commandments.
Then the Lord said to Moses, "Come up to me on the mountain, and I will give you the tablets of stone."
After the Israelites' flight from Egypt, God commanded Moses to ascend Mount Sinai. As he approached the holy mountain, the cloud of God's glory fell upon it. For 40 days and nights, the leader of Israel stood before the Creator of the universe and received the most important set of laws the world has ever known, the 10 Commandments. Etched into stone by the finger of God, these timeless precepts have shaped both Judaism and Christianity. No document ever written has surpassed its impact upon civilization.
Nothing was in the ark except the 2 tablets which Moses put there.
At Mount Sinai, God commanded Moses to build an extraordinary chest. In it, he was to place the 10 Commandments. The chest was made of acacia wood, covered with the purest gold, and crowned with 2 golden cherubim. This was the Ark of the Covenant. Throughout their years of wandering in the wilderness, the Ark was the spiritual center of the Israelites' existence. For Moses and his people believed that it embodied the literal presence and power of God. When Israel finally entered the promised land of Canaan, the Ark of the Covenant led their procession. Before it, the Jordan River turned dry, the walls of Jericho collapsed, and enemy armies were defeated as the children of Israel took control of their homeland. In 965 BC, King Solomon built a magnificent temple in Jerusalem. There, the Ark was placed in a sacred chamber called the Holy of Holies. The scriptures indicate that for nearly 400 years, the Ark and the 10 Commandments remained secure in Solomon's temple. Then, early in the 6th century BC, all biblical and historical records of their existence abruptly end. What happened to the Holy Ark and God's tablets of the law? Do they still exist? And if so, where? Today there are several theories.
Then they burned down the house of God.
Some scholars believe that the Ark was either stolen or destroyed in 587 BC, when the Babylonian armies sacked Jerusalem and burned Solomon's temple to the ground. The destruction was so complete, the only artifact ever recovered was this tiny vase. There are other theories, however, that raise the possibility the Ark is still somewhere in or near Jerusalem. Many Orthodox Jewish scholars contend that the Ark is hidden under the Temple Mount, perhaps buried in a secret chamber constructed during the reign of Solomon. They believe the Ark and the 10 Commandments will be excavated when the temple is rebuilt. Other researchers have suggested that the Ark may lie in a tunnel beneath Calvary, the site of Christ's crucifixion, or outside the city at Qumran, in one of the caves that overlook the Dead Sea. In 1981, the motion picture Raiders of the Lost Ark brought attention to long-held speculation that the Ark and the 10 Commandments are somewhere other than Israel. The film portrays the Ark as spirited out of Jerusalem and then hidden in an underground Egyptian city. Local tradition suggests that the Ark may be on Elephantine Island, a rocky outcropping in southern Egypt, for it is known that after Jerusalem fell, many Israelites fled here to escape persecution, possibly taking the ark with them. South of Egypt, in the Ethiopian town of Axum, another theory has recently attracted attention. Some historians, again citing local tradition and biblical clues, believe the ark is locked within this chapel. Only one priest is allowed to view the alleged ark. His lifetime responsibility is to protect the holy vessel and its contents. Are the Ten Commandments and the Ark of the Covenant hidden in any of these places? Or are they somewhere else, still buried under 2,500 years of history and conjecture? Since the last days of Solomon's temple, these sacred relics have vanished from the eyes of the world. Yet the aura of mystery and reverence that surrounds the tablets of God's law and the ark built to contain them will continue to motivate exploration and new theories in the decades to come.